The war was over. That's what the broadcast kept saying. Across the starfields and fractured colonies, the ceasefire bells had rung hollow and metallic, echoing through systems too tired to cheer. Treaties were signed by hands that had never bled, and commanders who'd never seen the ash of their own people raised glasses behind sealed doors. But deep in Sector Delta, an outpost so far from the central trade rings that no one remembered why it was built, one prisoner still waited. She wasn't a soldier. Not anymore. Her armor, once lined with blue fire and golden trim, now lay shredded across the rusted floor like shed skin. Her name was Valyra, though no one here spoke it. Not the guards who passed her cell without looking. Not the men who threw mold-speck trays into her corner and walked away. And certainly not the officer who had forgotten she even existed. She had no number, no record, only chains, bruises, and the ache of 10 silent days where she had eaten nothing but hope. The cold was the worst. It seeped through her bones like rot. Each breath drew pain through cracked ribs. Her wrists had long stopped bleeding where the shackles bit into them. She no longer cried for help. She didn't have the strength. Her voice had faded on day 4. Her dignity on day 6, somewhere above, a transport drone held past the vent slats in the ceiling. She didn't look up that far. Above, in the mess of steel walkways and flickering lights, Dean recursed as he kicked a loose crate that jammed his hover cart. A shipment of dehydrated rations had been tagged for Central Barracks, but the nav tag blinked red now. Rude error. Typical. Logistics was always cleaning up someone else's mess. Dean didn't argue. He just rerouted, ducking beneath low, piping and squeezing through narrow hallways no one bothered to maintain. That's when he heard it. Not a shout, not a groan. A sound so small it could have been machinery whining. But it wasn't. He paused, breath caught. It came again, a soft, raw whimper, like a voice that had forgotten how to ask for help. The hair on his arms rose. The hallway curved down, darker here, colder. The walls were scarred with peeled code labels and rust. A door stood half lit by. A dying motion panel. Detention sector, access restricted. He shouldn't have been there. But he stepped forward. His boots echoed as he approached the cell. And then he saw her dot curled in the corner of a narrow cage, no blanket, no mattress. Her head was bowed, strands of white-silver hair matted with grime. Her armor, what was left of it, hung from her frame like a broken flag. The room stank of blood and metal, but she didn't move. Not even when he stepped closer. DNE froze. This wasn't a prisoner. This wasn't an enemy. She looked up. Her eyes were cracked green glassware, sunken and quietly alive. They flicked to his uniform. His cart, his hands. She didn't flinch. But she didn't beg either. She'd long stopped believing kindness could exist in this place. His throat tightened. "Can you hear me?" he asked, voice low, uncertain. She blinked slowly, like she didn't understand the question. Or maybe she was afraid to hope. DNE stepped back, heartbeat thudding. He looked at the keypad beside the door. High clearance. Beyond his rank. Beyond his reach, but not beyond his conscience. Not yet, he murmured to himself. But soon. He turned and walked away, but every step felt like betrayal. Her eyes followed him long after he disappeared down the corridor. The next morning, Dean rker sat at the loading bay console, eyes fixed on the blinking manifest logs, but his mind was miles below, buried in steel and silence. The face behind the bars haunted him, not because it was alien, but because it wasn't. It was just broken. And something deep in him, something he'd buried beneath years of following orders and staying invisible, had started to stir. He told himself to forget. Not his problem, not his clearance. He was a logistics grunt, nothing more. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her hands trembling, bruised, too thin to fight. He remembered the way she hadn't begged, how her silence screamed louder than anything he'd heard on the battlefield. And that was the problem. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not anymore. DNE wasn't a rule breaker. Not really. He just bent things. Nudge systems. After a while in logistics, you learned how to open doors without setting off alarms. And so, after shift change, when the other techs had gone for meal rotations, he slipped into the terminal access room. No cameras here. Sector Delta's surveillance. Grid was outdated and patched together by old war tech. Easy enough to loop a few feeds. He opened the prisoner manifest for Delta's lower wing. 10 cells. 9 names. She wasn't listed. He ran another query. Detention logs. Security reports. Incident trackers. Nothing. Like she never existed. His jaw clenched. Detainees weren't allowed to vanish, not even in a war zone. Especially not now, when the peace accords were being drafted. Every alien held post-ceasefire had to be accounted for, tried, processed, or released. Unless someone didn't want. Her name reaching the tribunals. He leaned back, cold realization crawling down his spine. Whoever had left her there wanted her forgotten. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was a secret. He accessed backup archives, old routing orders, sealed communications from before the outpost lost command contact. Buried in a batch of encrypted files, he found it. Envoy Protection Protocol, Dravari Delegate Valyra Venkai. Status: hold for negotiation transfer. Pending tribunal clearance. Dated 11 days ago. His stomach dropped. She'd been part of a diplomatic team, a peace envoy. And someone had labeled her a threat without trial, without counsel, without even logging her existence. The outpost had fallen into chaos during the final siege. Half the command staff had either fled or died. And in the noise, someone had stuffed her in a cell and left her there to rot. He stared at the screen, fists tightening. This wasn't justice. This wasn't war. This was rot. And if the decommission orders came through, she'd be gone. Executed. Quietly. No records. No questions. And no one would know what had happened, unless he did something. But what could he do? He didn't even have the clearance to unlock the cell. Not without tripping 6 silent alarms. He didn't have access to high command codes. He didn't even have a weapon. He had nothing, except a conscience. And the uneasy sense that if he didn't act, he'd carry her ghost with him forever. That night, he waited until third shift rotation, when the halls were thinnest and the guards were half asleep or too deep into contraband holovids to care. He stuffed 2 protein bars into the lining of his utility coat and filled a stolen flask with clean water from the officer's mess. It wasn't much, but it was something. He crept down the same hallway, slower this time, watching every motion sensor and manual relay panel. He'd memorized the blind spots. Years of hauling equipment taught you which shadows belonged to the FEA system and which ones were safe. At the cell, she was awake. Barely. Her eyes opened slowly, tracking him like a wounded animal too tired to run. He crouched low and slid the bars and flask beneath the frame, through a small tear in the plating. "Eat," he whispered. She stared. Then, shaking, she reached forward and grabbed the food with both hands, tore the wrapper with her teeth, devoured the bars in seconds, every movement frantic and desperate. She drank like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to not be thirsty. DNE looked away. Ashamed. She finished and slumped back, panting. For a moment, she just stared at him, lips parted, trying to speak. Finally, her voice came barely audible. "Why are you helping me?" He blinked. Not just at the question, but at her perfect grasp of English. He opened his mouth, closed it, then simply said, Because you're still alive. She studied him. The mistrust in her eyes had not faded. But somewhere behind the pain and fear, a tiny spark had returned. Hope. He stood slowly. I'll come back. Just hold on. She didn't answer. But as he turned to go, she pressed her hand against the bars softly, like a promise. He walked back into the dark. He didn't know what came next. But he knew one thing: he couldn't walk away again. The alarms didn't go off when he slipped into the supply depot an hour early. No one questioned the extra bandages he requisitioned, the antiseptic vials tucked into his boots, or the nutrient gels hidden beneath re-wrapped ration packs. After all, Dean Rker was just another logistics tech, overworked, invisible, utterly forgettable. And that was exactly what he needed to be. Beneath the outpost, in the hollow metal bowels where warmth did not reach, Valyra still breathed. Dne could barely believe it. 10 days without proper food, water, light, or medical care, and she hadn't broken. Not completely. Something in her had refused. Something quiet and brutal, like the last ember of a star refusing to die. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. But that second night, when he returned, she sat up before he even reached the door, waiting. I brought more, he whispered, sliding a satchel beneath the bars. Protein, hydration gel, an injector of broad-spectrum antibiotics. Her hand trembled as she took it. She didn't ask what it cost him, but he told her anyway. I used my backup credentials to spoof a requisition order. They'll think it was for a field unit. He paused. If they find out, I'm finished. She looked at him for a long time, then said softly, So why do it? He swallowed. Because you're not supposed to be here. And because no one else cares. Valyra studied him. Not with gratitude, but with something more dangerous: understanding. You'll need more than food to save me. I know. For the next 4 days, he returned. Every night, same hour, same routine. His visits were brief, silent, tense. But with each one, she grew a little stronger. Her wounds began to close. The tremor in her fingers faded. Her voice, once raspy and uncertain, steadied. She began to tell him her story: how she was the daughter of a Dravari diplomat, how the peace delegation was intercepted during the ceasefire talks, how they were ambushed by a splinter unit that wanted the war to continue, wanted chaos to justify power. She was spared, not by mercy, but because someone in command thought she might be useful as leverage. When the outpost fell into disarray and the leadership was purged in a final retaliatory strike, her name, her status, and her very identity vanished in the collapse. They used me to start a war, then forgot I existed. Her tone was bitter, but her eyes stayed clear. And now they'll try to erase what's left of you, Dean muttered. He stared at the floor. Unless I get you out. Valyra tilted her head. How? I don't know yet, but I will. He knew what was coming. Every logistics grunt had heard the whisper: Sector Delta was being decommissioned. Assets pulled, staff reassigned, evidence sanitized, detainees not officially logged. They were dead already. They just didn't know it yet. He needed a plan. He started small. First, he mapped the guard rotations, memorized the angles of every surveillance camera, noted which terminals were tied to central records and which ran isolated subgrids. He rewired an old maintenance drone to loop footage for 20-second bursts, long enough to hide a pass-by. Then he took a bigger risk. He hacked into the back-end tribunal scheduling node using a relay meant for fuel distribution logs. From there, he faked a pending transfer: Valyra Venkai, Dravari envoy, status, witness protection hold. The terminal denied his entry at first, so he cloned the authorization token of a commander who'd recently been reassigned to the inner rim. It worked. Just like that. On record, Valyra was no longer a ghost, but records weren't reality. Reality was still bars and steel and guards who wouldn't blink before pulling a trigger. The illusion had to be complete, and for that, he'd need a signature. An official stamp. Which meant he'd have to break into Major Sylvan's office. No one broke into Major Sylvan's office. Sylvian was a hardliner, ex-frontline, decorated, brutal, the kind of man who didn't need to bark orders to be obeyed. His presence alone made people shrink. He also drank alone every night after his shift. And his office, like most command-level rooms, was sealed by biometric locks tied to a rotating passcode cycle. DNE didn't have access to Sylvan's biometrics, but he had something else. Event schematic. At 3:40 hours, while Sylvan snored in his bunk, Dean crawled through the ceiling ducts, silent as a shadow, bypassed 2 sensor nodes with a jerry-rigged heat sinker, and dropped into the office like a ghost. His gloves trembled as he slid the command pad from the desk. Within minutes, he had the seal. He slipped out before the morning cycle began. The next day, Valyra sat straighter. The fire in her eyes wasn't hope anymore. It was calculation. "You're planning something big," she said. "I'm planning to give." "You back your name?" She stared, then asked, "What if we fail?" Dean looked at her. "Then we fail doing something that matters." Neither of them spoke for a long time, but when she reached through the bars and pressed her fingers to his hand, he didn't pull away. The alert came through the logistics channel. First a short, sterile command packet buried between routing codes and requisition updates. Most grunts ignored these. Dean DIDN single quotes T. Command Protocol 742D Sector Delta decommission scheduled. Evac and purge ops begin in 72 hours. Prisoner processing mandatory. Non-compliance will result in tribunal inquiry. The words weren't loud, but to Dean, they screamed. He reread the directive 3 times. Prisoner processing. No trials, no witnesses. Just a final sweep through the lower cells before the lights were turned off forever. They'd erase everything. The walls, the mistakes, and Valyra, quietly, efficiently, like she was never there. Dean's chest tightened. This wasn't a countdown. It was a death sentence, and he had less than 3 days to stop it. He sat frozen in the maintenance bay, fingers twitching above his datapad. The outpost hummed around him, the usual mechanical breath of a system going through the motions. No one else flinched. No one else panicked. Why would they? No one else knew. He looked at the time. The next guard. Rotation hit in 2 hours. He'd have 10 minutes of blind footage if the loop drone worked. He could get down to her, warn her. Start Phase 2. But Phase 2 didn't exist yet. He needed a ship, clearance, a falsified extraction order that wouldn't get flagged. And he needed it now. He sprinted back to the dormitories, heart pounding. His hands shook as he broke into the drunken files of Lieutenant Perenna, sloppy officer with a nasty gambling habit and a carelessness Dean had memorized over months of supply. HANDOFFs. He found what he needed. Level -7 access credentials, biometric hash keys, digital signature fragments. Enough to fabricate a mid-tier extraction order that looked clean to outer command nodes if no one stared too hard. If no one cross-referenced in real time. He forged the order in less than 2 hours. He burned through 5 different terminals across 4 sub-departments to scatter the trace logs. The message was simple. Transfer. Valyra Venkai. Status. Tribunal witness. Jurisdiction override. Escort priority. Immediate. It wouldn't hold forever. But he didn't need forever. He needed 1 night. By the time he reached her cell, sweat slicked his neck. His hands were cut from vent edges, one sleeve torn at the seam. But he was there, and she was waiting. What happened? She asked. Her voice had strength now low, sure, but wary. He showed her the dataship. You're being transferred, officially. Tribunal wants you alive. She narrowed her eyes. You forged that, yes. You realize what happens if they scan the chip. He nodded. She stepped closer to the bars, eyes locking on his. You'll die, so will you, he said, unless we move now. She didn't answer right away. But then, quietly, then let's move. The next obstacle was the worst guard. Reynolds, a walking slab of muscle and rot, known for making detainees disappear under malfunction excuses. He didn't believe in aliens. He didn't believe in mercy. He believed in the sound of boots hitting bone, and he ran night shift. In the detention ward, DNE didn't blink as he approached the gate, chip in hand, coat zipped high to hide his pulse. What's this? Reynolds growled. Transfer order. Tribunal flagged her. Once her moved to ARC Post 17, High Command. They want that thing alive? He spat on the floor. Why? Dean didn't flinch. You want to question the tribunal? Because I can. Log this interaction. See how it goes over in the post-war commissions. Reynolds narrowed his eyes, stepped forward. You think your little coat and your datapad scare me, Grunt? No, Dean said. But a tribunal inquiry into obstruction of justice might. Long pause. Reynolds grunted, waved his hand, and turned. Fine. Take the freak. Not my problem. The gate hissed open. Valyra didn't speak as they moved through the corridor. Her body swayed slightly weak, still recovering, but her feet never stopped. She wore a hooded drape over her torn clothes, just enough to mask her face from scanners. Just enough to blend. They passed 2 officers, a repair bot, a janitorial drone. No one looked twice until the last checkpoint. Security node. Delta Red. Perimeter access. And behind it, Officer Miller. You couldn't bluff him. Not easily. By the book. Sharp. Nervous about tribunal rules but loyal to the letter. The kind who ran a retinal scan just because protocol said so, even if you handed him the moon.dne single quotes S fingers slipped around the chip. One move and it would be over. One twitch and Miller would sound the alarm. Clearance code? Miller asked, not looking up. Class 7, override protocol. Miller frowned, scanned the chip. The fake credentials loaded slowly. Too slowly. Valyra's breath hitched beside him. Miller single quotes as eyes rose. Narrowed. This order's fresh. So's the situation, Dean said, forcing calm. Ask command if you want. Just be ready to explain the delay. Miller stared at him. 3 seconds. 6.10. The scanner pinged green. Miller exhaled. Get her out of here. Dean's knees almost buckled. But he kept walking. The outer door opened, wind howling in from the landing pads. The small diplomatic shuttle he'd stolen a launch code for set humming. It wouldn't last in a chase. But if they cleared orbit, it wouldn't matter. They boarded. DNE took the pilot seat. Valyra dropped into co-pilot, eyes wet, face unreadable. She turned to him. You don't even know me. I don't need to, he said. The shuttle rose. Sector. Delta shrank behind them. And for the first time in 10 days, Valyra was no longer a prisoner. The stars above Sector Delta blurred into streaks of white as the shuttle tore through the upper atmosphere, engines whining harder than they were designed to. Dunna's hands gripped the controls with white-knuckled urgency. Every bolt, every shudder of the hull felt like a warning. They weren't safe. Not yet. Beside him, Valyra sat silent, her eyes fixed on the retreating curve of the outpost through the rear window. For 10 days, that place had been her world, her cell, her torment, her grave waiting to happen. Now it was vanishing behind ion clouds and distance. But the scars clung to her skin like frost. How far to the next relay? She asked, voice low but steady. An hour, Dean said, scanning the nav grid. If we can reach the neutral corridor before command flags our signature, we disappear. And if we don't? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Valyra already knew. The comms panel crackled. Unidentified vessel, this is Sector Delta Command. Respond with clearance identification. DNA's blood ran cold. They hadn't even cleared the outer radar cone. Someone had checked the launch register. Someone had seen the signature. He tapped the console, flipping the comms channel to static. Don't respond. Don't breathe. How long before they send pursuit? She asked. Minutes? They needed a distraction. And he had one. He reached into the underdeck, yanked open a secured crate marked hazardous salvage, and pulled out a device he never thought he'd use, a jamming beacon rigged for short-range pulse disruption. It wouldn't stop them from being followed, but it would scramble their trail for a few minutes, just long enough to slip past the outpost's long-range ping nets. Valyra stared at him. That's military-grade tech. Got it off a trade convoy that never asked. Questions, he said, flicking the switch. A low hum vibrated through the floor, followed by a sharp distortion in the nav feed. The sensor readouts went blank for 4 seconds, then stabilized. We're invisible for 30 clicks, he said. After that, we pray. Valyra tilted her head. You steal tribunal chips. Forge diplomatic seals. Rewire outpost security. And now this, you're not just a supply grunt, are you? He didn't look at her. I was, until I met you. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Then dash beep. The proximity alarm lit red. One vessel. Inbound. Fast. Interceptor. Dean whispered. Probably command patrol. They must have tracked us off residual drive Echo. He pushed the shuttle into a hard dive. Valyra braced against the console as the stars tilted violently. They skimmed the edge of a meteor cluster, risky, but better. Then empty space. The rocks would interfere with scans. The interceptor closed in. Valyra grabbed the manual turret controls. They'll fire warning shots first. What if they don't? Then we don't give them the chance. She twisted the turret 90 degrees and locked onto the shadow behind them. The enemy ship pulsed blue as its shields flared. Targeting. Uplinks were active. They had 30 seconds. Dean veered left, scraping so close to a drifting rock that the hull sparked. Alarms howled. The inertial dampeners strained. The shuttle wasn't meant for combat. And Valyra, shackled and starved just days ago, was now manning the weapons. Array like she'd been born in a cockpit. A low growl came through the COMMs. Stand down or be vaporized. This is your final warning. Valyra pressed her hand to the trigger. Dean gritted his teeth. Do it, she fired. The pulse cannon roared. It struck the interceptor's wing clean, spinning the ship into a tailspin. Not destroyed, but stunned. Enough to buy time. We have 20 seconds before backup tracks that, Valyra warned. Then we vanish in 18. Dean punched in a blind jump, coordinates unregistered, unstable. Any nav officer would scream at him for even attempting it. But he didn't care. Not now. The countdown hit 0. The jump drive activated. Reality fractured. Everything stretched vision. Sound memory. The cabin swirled with flickering heat and compressed light. Valyra closed her eyes, jaw clenched. Dean held the controls steady, blood trickling from his nose. The jump wasn't smooth, but it held. They dropped out into empty space. No beacons. No stations. No pursuit. Just stars. Just silence. DNE slumped back, lungs burning. Valyra looked at him. You could have left me. You should have. I didn't. Why? He paused. Because if it were me down there, he said, I'd want someone to care. Valyra didn't respond right away. But then she nodded once deeply. Not in thanks. But in recognition. They weren't safe, but they were alive. Space was quiet, but it was never safe. The stars outside the shuttle windows glimmered like silent witnesses, cold and distant. No alarms, no interceptors, no tracking pings. But Dean Rker knew better. Absence of pursuit didn't mean freedom. It meant delay. It meant someone was deciding how to clean up the mess. He sat motionless in the pilot's seat, blood still drying under his nose from the violent blind jump. Behind him, the ship hummed softly, its systems auto-correcting from A strain. The nav display blinked in static. Coordinates unknown outside charted command zones. They'd made it. For now, valyra sat across from him, arms wrapped around her knees, her frame still thin but no longer trembling. The sharp fire in her eyes had returned. And so had her voice. "You risked everything for a stranger," she said. "You're not a stranger." Dean replied. "Then what am I?" He hesitated, then answered, "You're a story no one wanted to hear." Valyra looked away. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She just stared into the stars, her thoughts drifting in the same direction they'd fled from. But Dean knew she was doing the same calculations he was. How long until the tribunal noticed a falsified record? How long before a kill order got issued under the table? This wasn't a rescue. It was a countdown. And time was bleeding out fast. Dne stood up, wobbling slightly. His legs hadn't stopped shaking since the jump. He opened the auxiliary panel and pulled out the emergency comms beacon. "What are you doing?" Valyra asked. Sharply. "Pinging the war tribunal," he said. "Not the outer stations, the main hub on the neutral axis." "You think they'll believe you? You think they'll care?" "No, but they'll log it. And once it's logged, it exists. And once it exists, it can't be quietly buried." Valyra's eyes narrowed. "They'll find us." "They already are." He calibrated the signal, encrypted it 3 ways, and embedded the transfer logs. The forged documentation, the prisoner manifest he'd uncovered, and most importantly, the truth. A full audio file from the cell block's archived surveillance, showing her injuries, her isolation, her words. The ones she had spoken when no one was supposed to be listening. "What did you include?" she asked. "Everything. Even me begging for water?" "Especially that." Valyra looked at him, pain flickering across her face. "Then they'll see me weak." "No," he said. "They'll see you human." A pause. "Then. I'm not human." He met her gaze. "You are to me." He pressed transmit. The beacon shot its signal into deep space, bouncing across relay satellites until it reached a classified tribunal server node. There would be no immediate reply. Maybe no reply at all. But it was done. They waited. Hours passed. Dne and Valyra shared water, silence, and small words that didn't carry weight but built something. Fragile, unsure, but real. Then a ping. A signal, buried beneath encryption layers, crawled through the comms relay and landed in the ship's inbox. Dean opened it slowly, sweat collecting at his brow. Origin. Intergalactic. Tribunal Oversight Division. Priority. Sealed. Message. Confirm identity and location. Do not engage. Extraction en route. Valyra stared. "They're sending someone?" Dean nodded slowly. "Is that good or bad?" He didn't answer. Because he didn't know. 2 hours later, a ship appeared outside their shuttle window, sleek, black, unmarked. It moved with purpose, not protocol. Valyra tensed. "That's not tribunal military." "No," Dean said, standing. "It's internal affairs." The shuttle docked. The airlock hissed open. 3 figures stepped aboard. No insignia, no weapons drawn. Only one spoke. "You Dean Rker?" He nodded. "You the one who filed witness protection under forged tribunal codes?" He swallowed. "Yes." The man looked past him. His eyes met Valyra's. Then you've caused a very inconvenient truth to surface, he said. But also a necessary one. Valyra stepped forward, unafraid. Are you here to kill me? No, the man said. We're here to make sure no one else does. He extended a hand. She didn't take it, but she didn't retreat. You'll be taken to a secured testimony chamber, he continued. Full diplomatic protections. Your presence will trigger a review of the Sector Delta executions. Valyra whispered. How many others were buried like me? More than we'd like to admit, the man said. She glanced at D&E. He didn't speak. He just nodded. She stepped forward, but paused in the airlock. Looked back. You should come. I'm just a grunt, he said. Not anymore. But he shook his head. Someone needs to stay behind. Tell the others. Keep watch for the next one who gets left behind. She understood. Without another word, she stepped into the black vessel. The door sealed, and then she was gone. It took them 7 months to acknowledge her name. Not on broadcasts. Not in victory speeches. Not in the golden halls where politicians debated peace as if it were a luxury brand they could sell. No, Valyra's name first appeared in a tribunal. Footnote, tucked beneath 27 pages of intergalactic proceedings, coded under Witness Reference 7 GDR Evankai, but it was there. Finally, her name was written down. No longer a ghost, Dean rker didn't celebrate. He was back where he belonged, moving crates, fixing ducks, rerouting ration packs to outposts that no one cared about. People still passed him in the corridor without seeing him. He was still a cog. Still invisible. But he no longer felt empty. Word of the Delta outpost purge had spread quietly. Most believed it was just a failed sector lost in transition. But a few whispered of a prisoner who had survived. A Dravari, a diplomat's daughter, and a human grunt who'd broken every rule to save her. They didn't speak his name either, but that was fine. He hadn't done it to be remembered. Still, when the tribunal notice came, he read it twice, thinking it was a mistake. You are hereby summoned to attend the Honored Tribunal Summit at Axis Station, under Article 4.4.7. Civilian acts of justice outside chain of command. He almost didn't go, but something inside him, maybe that same echo, that had driven him down the forbiddance hallways of Sector Delta, said he needed to. Axis Station was everything Delta wasn't. Gleaming towers, open skies, glass floors, and golden badges. A place where laws mattered more than people. Until people like Valyra reminded them why laws existed in the first place. They didn't give him a grand entrance. No medals. No music. They just gave him a visitor's pass. The summit chamber was enormous, filled with hundreds of delegates, human, Dravari, Ventari, Silith. All species who had once seen each other as enemies, now standing beneath the same lights. And in the center, behind the transparent podium, stood Valyra. Her skin had healed. Her posture was proud. Her voice, when it spoke, was the same voice that had whispered for water in the dark. But now it echoed. I am not here because I survived, she said. I am here because someone saw me. Someone who had no rank, no power, and no reason to care. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a judge. He wasn't even supposed to be near my cell. A ripple passed through the chamber. Valyra continued. They left me in a cage for 10 days, chained, beaten, starved. They forgot I existed, but he didn't. He remembered, and he chose to act when the cost was highest. Dean shifted in his seat, uncomfortable beneath the eyes turning his way. Valyra raised her hand, pointing directly at him. That man saved my life, and because of him, your systems were forced to look inward, forced to admit what we all tried to ignore. That justice is not what we write on paper, it's what we do when no one is watching. A long silence. Then applause, slow, rising, Not thunderous, but real. After the summit, she found him on the edge of the platform. She wore robes now, the markings of the Dravari High Council traced along her sleeves. But when she smiled, it wasn't diplomatic. It was personal. "You look tired," she said. "I've been lifting crates for 7 months." "You could have told them," she said. "You could have made them see you sooner." He shook his head. "It wasn't about me." Valyra studied him for a moment. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a thin piece of folded metal. A nameplate. Burnt, battered, covered in ash but still legible. "They found this in Sector Delta. It was on the floor outside my cell. Dean took it. His name was etched into it, barely visible under the soot. I kept it," she said, "because it reminded me that even when I was forgotten, someone was still willing to bleed for me." He looked at her, unsure of what to say. Valyra took his hand, fingers brushing the scars that hadn't healed from the jump, the crawl, the broken code panels. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You gave me back my name. Now let me return the favor." In the months that followed, things changed. Slowly. Painfully. The tribunal reopened dozens of cold case files. Protocols were rewritten. Anonymous prisoners were named. Testimonies were gathered from voices long buried under war, and at the center of that shift, quiet, almost invisible, stood a former grunt who never asked for recognition. He just kept watching, and when no one else noticed, he saw. Years later, in a quiet archive hall on a neutral moon, a small bronze plaque was installed. No ceremony. No speech. Just words etched in 2 languages, for those who looked when others turned away. For the ones who broke the rules so justice could live. Beneath it, 2 names. Valyra Venkai. Dean rker, the girl they tried to erase, and the man who didn't let them.